At Thanksgiving dinner, my dad shouted, "If you don't invest in your younger brother's startup company, then from this moment on, we're cutting all family ties with you." I calmly replied, "Fine. If that's what everyone wants, I'll leave." 3 years later, after surviving that bitter betrayal, I built an empire completely from scratch. I am Tanya Drake, 29 years old, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of Drake Medical Supply, a premier commercial enterprise based in downtown Indianapolis, Indiana. The facility is my sanctuary, a high-stakes operational hub where my dedicated team coordinates critical healthcare logistics across the Midwest. Right in the middle of our peak Friday operational rush, my floor manager pushed through the executive suite doors, his face utterly pale with panic. He leaned in close, whispering that a severe crisis was unfolding in the main boardroom. 3 uninvited individuals had bullied their way past security, completely ignoring the reception desk and locking themselves inside our private VIP suite. They were aggressively harassing my administrative staff and demanding to see the owner immediately. I handed my operational tablet to my assistant, straightened my blazer, and walked down the glass corridor toward the suite. But the second I stepped through those doors, the air was pulled straight out of my lungs. Sitting in my executive boardroom, acting like they owned my multi-million-dollar business, was the very family that had erased me 3 years ago. Before I continue this story, hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your hard-earned peace and future. The cool, climate-controlled air of my executive suite did nothing to soothe the sudden burning tension in the room. Sitting around my glass conference table were the 3 people who had heartlessly discarded me, acting as if they owned the very floor beneath their feet. My father, Louis Drake, sat at the head of the table wearing a sharply tailored suit that looked opulent, but was clearly showing its age. Beside him, my mother, Jeanette, was running her manicured fingers along the edge of her counterfeit designer handbag while eyeing the sleek interior with bitterness. Completing the group was my younger brother Landon, who leaned back in an executive chair with an arrogant smirk, spinning a set of luxury car keys around his index finger. Without uttering a single word of greeting, Louis reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legal papers, and slammed them violently onto the polished mahogany surface. The sharp bang echoed off the high ceilings, instantly commanding the room. He demanded that I transfer 30% of my medical supply enterprise to the family trust before the end of the business day. He leaned forward, his voice carrying that familiar, suffocating authority that used to paralyze me as a teenager. He warned that if I refused, he would make a personal phone call to Mr. Thornton Cross tonight. Louis boasted that they regularly played golf together at the country club, claiming he knew for a fact that the billionaire real estate tycoon was the sole landlord of this commercial property. He threatened to have Mr. Thornton Cross invalidate my commercial lease immediately, effectively shutting down my entire operation before Monday morning. Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of his threat, Landon tossed his keys onto the table and pointed a finger directly at my floor manager, Paul, who was standing nervously near the doorway. Landon loudly announced that the moment his equity transfer cleared, he was taking over as head of operations and restructuring the entire company. He snapped at Paul, telling him he was fired on the spot because he did not like his protective attitude. Landon then turned his eyes toward my private equipment display case, brazenly declaring that he was taking several high-end diagnostic units to sell for quick capital for his cryptocurrency venture. My mother, Jeanette, leaned in with a sickly, sweet smile that barely concealed the venom underneath. She hissed that I owed this to the family, reminding me how selfishly I had acted 3 years ago when I refused to hand over my life savings to fund Landon's startup. She insisted that while I was playing with medical boxes, my brother was attempting to disrupt the global financial ecosystem. Jeanette claimed that my current success was built on the foundation of their tough love, and it was time for me to pay my long-overdue debt to the parents who had raised me. I stood perfectly motionless, allowing their delusion and entitlement to wash over me without giving them the emotional reaction they desperately craved. 3 years ago, their cruel words would have brought me to my knees, but the woman standing in this room today was an untouchable businesswoman who knew the exact measure of her own power. Without breaking eye contact with Louis, I reached out and picked up the extortion contract. I grabbed the heavy stack of paper with both hands and, with one swift, deliberate motion, tore the entire document cleanly in half. The sound of ripping paper cut sharply through the heavy silence, causing Jeanette to gasp audibly as I dropped the torn remnants directly into the trash bin beside my desk. Louis's face instantly flushed a dangerous shade of crimson as his patriarchal authority disintegrated before his eyes. Furious, he yanked his smartphone from his coat pocket, waving the screen wildly in the air like a loaded weapon. He bellowed that he was dialing Mr. Thornton Cross right now, boasting that his powerful friend would destroy my career before I could clear the room. He jammed the speakerphone button, holding the device out so everyone could hear the execution of my business. The line rang twice before a sharp, deeply annoyed voice barked through the speaker. Mr. Thornton Cross demanded to know who was bothering him on his private line during a high-profile charity gala. Louis instantly adjusted his posture, adopting a sickeningly jovial tone as he reminded the billionaire of their casual golf pairing months ago. Louis pleaded for an immediate favor, demanding that Mr. Thornton Cross terminate my commercial lease due to my hostile behavior. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room before Mr. Thornton Cross barked back with absolute disdain. He scolded Louis for making a fool of himself, asking if he was intoxicated to call him with such an absurd request. The billionaire bluntly revealed that he had sold this entire commercial complex 2 years ago to an anonymous private holding company, meaning he had zero ties to the property or its tenants. He barked at Louis to lose his contact number permanently before sharply disconnecting the call. The sharp beep of the ended call rang out like a death knell over my family's smug expressions. Louis stared at his phone in absolute paralyzed shock, his face completely drained of color. He stammered that it did not matter, wildly threatening to hunt down the anonymous corporation through public records and destroy me anyway. I simply looked at him with icy detachment and picked up my desk phone. I instructed my security team to enter the suite and physically escort all 3 trespassers off my property, immediately warning my family that if they resisted, the police would be waiting for them on the pavement outside. By Saturday morning, the embarrassing defeat my family suffered inside my executive suite transformed into a relentless cyber war against my brand. I woke up at dawn to my personal cell phone buzzing continuously with frantic messages from my executive team, urging me to inspect our digital storefronts immediately. When I loaded our official commercial profile, my blood instantly ran cold as I watched our immaculate rating plummet from a perfect 4.9 down to a devastating 2.8 in real time. Hundreds of malicious one-star reviews were flooding our public portal every single minute, deploying highly specific and utterly fabricated allegations designed to destroy our industry credibility. The automated comments claimed that our sterile surgical supplies arrived contaminated with mold, that our diagnostic machinery caused severe patient infections in local clinics, and that our customer service staff directed abusive slurs at clients before abruptly cutting off contact. This was not an organic wave of dissatisfied healthcare buyers, but rather a coordinated algorithmic execution orchestrated by Landon. He was finally putting his tech background to malicious use, deploying a sophisticated network of automated bot accounts to carpet bomb my enterprise across every major commercial directory. In the highly regulated medical distribution market, an unblemished reputation is your entire lifeblood, and a targeted digital slaughter of this magnitude threatened to freeze our institutional supply contracts before Monday morning. Before my internal management team could even assess the full scale of the bot attack, my public relations director Griffin Reed forwarded a viral video link accompanied by several red exclamation points. I opened the media file and Landon's face completely filled my monitor as he delivered a manufactured performance to his growing social media audience. He was filming himself from the passenger seat of his rented luxury vehicle, using the harsh daylight to accentuate fake, glistening tears streaming down his face, Landon sobbed uncontrollably into the camera, claiming that he had been violently brutalized by heavy security guards inside my corporate headquarters simply for attempting to deliver a friendly family visit. He intentionally weaponized social outrage, falsely insisting that my security team used aggressive physical force and racial slurs against him while forcibly throwing him onto the pavement. Landon deliberately omitted every shred of truth regarding their extortion attempt, framing me as an arrogant, cold-hearted corporate mogul who targeted minority family members and distributed dangerously defective medical gear to local hospitals. He explicitly begged his followers to boycott my company, tag state regulatory boards, and demand an immediate emergency shutdown of our distribution facilities. The viral clip was racking up hundreds of thousands of views, shares, and outraged comments every hour, drawing the attention of local news stations and city officials who were now demanding an official statement regarding our operating ethics. Watching Landon wipe away dry, non-existent tears on a continuous loop transformed my initial anger into a razor-sharp, cold resolve. My family truly believed that public humiliation and digital mob violence would force me into a panicked surrender, expecting me to hand over our equity just to make the online nightmare disappear. However, they completely underestimated the resilience of the woman who had built this enterprise through sheer survival. I immediately drove to our headquarters, converting my private office into a high-stakes crisis command center alongside Griffin and our legal counsel. We initiated a swift, ruthless counteroffensive to neutralize the fabricated narrative before the evening news cycle could solidify their lies. First, Griffin retrieved the pristine 4K security footage from our main lobby and executive corridor. The high-definition video was crystal clear, capturing the entire time-stamped sequence with pristine audio clarity. It undeniably proved that Landon had been screaming threats at Paul, that Louis had thrown a physical extortion contract onto my desk, and that my security guards executed a textbook, completely hands-free escort straight out the front glass doors without ever laying a violent hand on anyone. Simultaneously, I pulled our active certifications and unblemished inspection records directly from the Indiana Department of Health, proving that every single medical device in our warehouse held full state authorization and rigorous safety compliance. Griffin assembled a comprehensive digital evidence package attaching the pristine video footage, verified state health credentials, and forensic data tracking the automated bot network back to fraudulent server locations. We submitted this urgent dossier directly to the legal divisions of the major social platforms and local news outlets, issuing formal cease and desist notices while demanding the immediate removal of the defamatory media within 12 hours. By late afternoon, the tech platforms recognized the coordinated bot network and systematically purged the fake reviews, while news anchors began airing our clear security video, completely exposing Landon's viral stunt as a desperate, fabricated smear campaign. 2 days later, just as our public relations victory began to stabilize our commercial reputation, a severe financial bomb dropped onto my desk. My private office line rang, and the caller identity displayed the legal compliance department of First Indiana Commercial Bank. The senior risk analyst on the line dropped a staggering piece of news that made my heart stop. He formally notified me that a commercial credit facility worth $250,000 registered under my personal identity was 90 days delinquent. He sternly warned that because the loan had entered severe default status, the financial institution was initiating immediate asset seizure protocols against my business accounts within 48 hours. I sat frozen in my leather chair, completely stunned, because I had never opened any commercial credit lines with First Indiana Commercial Bank. I immediately demanded an emergency digital transfer of the original loan application documents, along with all verified signature pages. Within minutes, the encrypted files arrived in my inbox, and as I scrolled through the scanned records, the horrifying truth revealed itself. 3 years ago, during the chaotic week immediately following my expulsion from the family house on Thanksgiving night, Luis and Landon had executed a calculated scheme of identity theft. They had broken into my stored personal belongings, stolen my social security number birth certificate, and private tax records using them to fraudulently apply for a massive commercial loan. They forged my signature with terrifying precision, directing the entire $250,000 payout straight into Landon's fraudulent cryptocurrency investment platform. The sudden realization of what they had done triggered a sharp wave of bitter memories, violently pulling my mind back to the brutal winter of 3 years ago. Back then, after refusing to fund Landon's reckless scheme, I was thrown out into the freezing Indianapolis snow with nothing more than 2 battered suitcases and less than $40 in my bank account. For 3 agonizing months, I slept shivering on the cargo floor of an ancient, rusty delivery van that I managed to rent for $5 a day. The icy Midwestern winds leaked through the cracked metal doors, forcing me to wrap myself in thin second-hand moving blankets just to survive the sub-zero nights. I survived on discarded canned soup and leftover bread from local soup kitchens, saving every single penny I earned from working 3 grueling overnight shifts as a warehouse laborer. It was through that unimaginable suffering, bone-chilling cold, and relentless isolation that I painstakingly scraped together the initial seed capital to launch my first small medical supply shop. While I was freezing inside that metal delivery van, fighting for my absolute survival on the streets of downtown Indianapolis, my family was living comfortably in their suburban home, celebrating their fraudulent $250,000 windfall. They had deliberately saddled me with a catastrophic financial time bomb, completely unconcerned whether the massive debt ruined my credit score, pushed me into bankruptcy, or sent me to federal prison for a fraud I never committed. A cold, horrifying clarity suddenly washed over me as all the pieces of their bizarre behavior finally fell into place. My family had not suddenly materialized at my corporate headquarters out of nostalgic affection, nor were they merely driven by casual greed when they demanded 30% of my company. They were standing on the absolute edge of financial ruin because the bank was relentlessly hunting down the delinquent loan. Landon's fraudulent cryptocurrency venture had collapsed into total bankruptcy, leaving them utterly unable to make the exorbitant monthly debt payments. They knew that First Indiana Commercial Bank was preparing to initiate aggressive legal recovery proceedings, which would inevitably expose their identity theft and send both Louis and Landon straight to federal penitentiary. Their desperate, aggressive assault on my business was a calculated move to force me into absorbing the debt or handing over executive control so they could use my company's cash flow to quietly pay off the bank. They truly believed that after 3 years I would still be the naive, easily manipulated girl who would sacrifice her own future to protect her abusive family from the legal consequences of their own crimes. They assumed I would panic under their public pressure and silently pay off the fraudulent $250,000 just to maintain family harmony. I closed the loan files on my computer screen, feeling the last remaining shreds of filial obligation instantly evaporate from my heart. The lingering, painful memories of sleeping in that freezing delivery van transformed into an unshakable iron determination. They had willingly stolen my identity, weaponized my name for their fraudulent greed, and left me to freeze in the snow without a second thought. Now that their fraudulent structure was crumbling around them, they expected me to act as their financial savior. I picked up my office telephone, dialed the direct extension for my legal counsel, and instructed him to prepare an immediate comprehensive fraud report for federal law enforcement agencies. Early the following morning, I drove directly to the high-rise law firm of my commercial litigation attorney, Sterling Clare, to initiate a comprehensive forensic investigation into my family's financial state. Sitting across the dark oak desk in his office, Sterling slid a confidential inch-thick intelligence dossier toward me, his expression grave as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He explained that after digging into public records, court filings, and credit registries, his private investigators had uncovered the absolute financial devastation lurking behind my parents' lavish lifestyle. My family was not merely struggling with cash flow, but was rather standing on the precipice of absolute financial annihilation. The comprehensive audit revealed that Lewis's small real estate development firm was completely hollowed out and functionally insolvent. He had piled up massive state and federal tax liens amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars, while simultaneously facing active lawsuits from unpaid construction contractors and building suppliers across the state. Furthermore, the opulent family mansion situated in the affluent suburb of Carmel was already entering formal foreclosure proceedings, with the mortgage lender preparing for an auction after 8 consecutive months of missed housing payments. Louis had been desperately liquidating company assets and taking out predatory high-interest loans just to maintain the illusion of wealth within his social circle. The forensic report painted an equally desperate picture regarding Landon's personal finances following his cryptocurrency failure. The high-end luxury sports car he drove around town was currently subject to an active repossession order after 3 months of delinquent lease payments, forcing him to hide the vehicle in different parking garages to avoid recovery agents. Every single one of his personal credit cards had been frozen by major banking institutions due to defaulted balances and maxed-out credit limits. My family was completely backed into a corner, drowning in compound interest and facing immediate homelessness, which explained their obsessive campaign to seize 30% of my medical enterprise. They viewed my successful corporation as their ultimate financial lifeline, fully intending to pledge my equity as collateral to secure a massive consolidation loan from private lenders to clear their personal debts. Upon reviewing the undeniable evidence of identity theft and financial fraud, Sterling tapped his pen against the desk and urged me to let him contact federal prosecutors and local law enforcement immediately. He argued that the forged loan documents from First Indiana Commercial Bank provided more than enough grounds for an immediate arrest warrant, which would put Louis and Landon behind bars before the week ended. However, as I stared at the bank statements and foreclosure notices detailing their total collapse, I raised my hand and firmly instructed my attorney to hold off on filing the criminal complaints. Simply having the police hand them handcuffs felt far too quick and merciful for the 3 years of cold-hearted cruelty, abandonment, and systemic fraud they had inflicted upon me. I wanted to engineer a complete, undeniable psychological trap that would permanently destroy their sense of entitlement and force them to confess their crimes on record. I decided to exploit their overwhelming greed and desperation by offering them a false sense of victory. I instructed Sterling to send a formal legal invitation to Louis, Jeanette, and Landon, scheduling a mandatory closing negotiation session at my corporate headquarters for Sunday morning. The legal notice was strategically drafted to hint that I was finally willing to settle our disputes out of court and discuss a potential equity transfer in exchange for total confidentiality. Sterling understood my strategic objective immediately, smiling grimly as he began drafting the binding settlement framework and setting up our technical equipment. We spent the remainder of the afternoon converting my main executive boardroom into a controlled evidentiary trap, concealing state-of-the-art audio equipment and high-definition cameras around the conference table to record every single word exchanged during the upcoming meeting. I knew my family's arrogant entitlement would compel them to walk right through those doors on Sunday morning, fully believing that their public smear tactics and fraud had successfully broken my resolve. They would arrive expecting a humiliating surrender from a desperate daughter, completely unaware that they were stepping into a meticulously planned trap that would strip away their freedom forever. On Sunday morning, the eerie silence of our empty corporate headquarters provided a stark backdrop for the final reckoning. My family arrived at 9 sharp, stepping out of the elevator into my top-floor executive suite with visible arrogance. Louis, Jeanette, and Landon were accompanied by their budget attorney Montgomery, a disheveled man carrying a worn leather briefcase who looked thoroughly outmatched by the grandeur of the surroundings. Seeing the quiet building, they mistook the setting for a sign of desperation, falsely assuming that I had called this weekend meeting because their smear campaign and identity theft pressure had finally broken my spirit. They strutted into the main boardroom where Sterling and I sat waiting behind 2 heavy leather folders. Without waiting to be seated, Louis aggressively slammed his hand on the glass table, announcing that the terms of our agreement had drastically changed due to my earlier resistance. Montgomery pulled a revised settlement contract from his briefcase and pushed it across the table toward Sterling. Louis sneered that 30% equity was no longer sufficient to buy their silence, demanding an immediate 50% voting stake in my medical supply enterprise. To make matters worse, Landon added that my company must officially assume full liability for the delinquent $250,000 loan at First Indiana Commercial Bank, effectively forcing me to pay off their fraudulent debt out of my own operational cash flow. Jeanette immediately slid into her familiar manipulative routine, clasping her hands together and letting out a heavy theatrical sigh. She pleaded with me to act like a dutiful daughter, claiming that accepting these generous terms was the only way to heal our broken family bond. She insisted that an honorable child would gladly surrender half her empire to rescue her struggling parents, framing their extortion as a loving opportunity for emotional reconciliation. I sat completely unfazed by her emotional theatrics, maintaining an icy gaze that made Montgomery shift uncomfortably in his seat. Without uttering a word, I reached forward and opened the first blue leather folder resting on the table. Inside were certified property deeds, land registry filings, and corporate incorporation records bearing the official seal of the state of Indiana. I casually slid the documents across the glass surface directly in front of Louis. The paperwork clearly demonstrated that the entire commercial complex housing my headquarters was wholly owned by a private holding entity named Ironwood Assets. Louis scoffed at the documents, arrogantly reminding me that Mr. Thornton Cross had already mentioned selling the property to an anonymous entity, claiming that a shadowy landlord did not change the fact that my lease could still be canceled. I smiled coldly and pointed my finger at the bottom page of the corporate registration form, where my legal signature was boldly displayed as the sole managing director and primary owner of Ironwood Assets. I looked directly into his wide, panic-stricken eyes and revealed that I was not merely a tenant leasing space in this building, but rather the absolute exclusive landlord of the entire commercial property. Louis's face drained of all color as his primary leverage completely evaporated into thin air. Before they could even recover from the shocking revelation of my real estate ownership, I opened the second red leather folder and placed its contents beside the property records. This dossier contained heavy financial debt assignment contracts and certified bank transfer receipts executed 3 weeks prior. I explained that while Louis was busy managing his collapsing business, my investment firm had quietly purchased his entire portfolio of delinquent commercial mortgages and defaulted business credit lines directly from his primary lending bank through the secondary debt market. I looked my father straight in the eyes and informed him that I was no longer just his estranged daughter, but was now officially the single largest secured creditor of his failing real estate development firm. I pulled out a fresh stack of legal enforcement notices stamped with urgent court authorizations and handed them directly to Montgomery. I calmly announced that because his company had failed to make debt payments for 8 consecutive months, I was officially executing my rights as the primary note holder. I was immediately initiating summary foreclosure proceedings against his commercial inventory equipment and his personal assets, including the opulent family mansion in Carmel. The boardroom fell into an absolute suffocating silence as the reality of their total financial destruction washed over them. Louis slumped back into his chair, his hands trembling violently as he stared at the foreclosure notices carrying my legal authority. Jeanette gasped for air, clutching her designer handbag as if it could save her from impending homelessness, while Landon stood frozen in silent terror, realizing that his luxurious lifestyle had permanently vanished. Within moments, as my family sat paralyzed by the realization of their impending eviction, I opened the third and final black leather folder on the conference table. I casually slid the official government documents across the glass surface, revealing heavily stamped federal investigative filings bearing the official seals of the Department of Justice, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I informed them that the forged loan paperwork, stolen Social Security records, and illegal wire transfers associated with the $250,000 fraud had already been submitted for formal criminal prosecution. Upon reading the federal indictment sheets, Montgomery instantly paled, grabbed his briefcase without saying a single word to his clients, and practically sprinted out of the boardroom to avoid getting entangled in federal charges. Left completely defenseless without their attorney, the fragile mask of family unity instantly shattered into total chaos. Lewis whipped around and began screaming at Landon, violently accusing him of dragging the family into prison through his failed cryptocurrency scam and terrible forgery tactics. Landon furiously shoved his father back, shouting at the top of his lungs that Louis was the greedy coward who physically signed the fraudulent papers and demanded the money in the first place. They hurled vicious insults and tore at each other right across my conference table, desperately trying to shift criminal blame, while Jeanette wept hysterically in the corner, begging both of them to stop fighting. The violent squabble was abruptly silenced as the heavy double doors of my executive boardroom swung open. 4 armed federal agents from the FBI, accompanied by officers from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, marched into the room with weapons drawn and an arrest warrant in hand. The lead agent formally read Louis and Landon their Miranda rights, while officers forced them against the wall and snapped steel handcuffs around their wrists. Because the federal identity theft and wire fraud charges involve significant sums and clear flight risks, the prosecutor ensured there would be no bail options, leaving them facing 10 to 15 years in federal penitentiary without any possibility of suspended sentences or early parole. As the law enforcement officers hauled my kicking and screaming father and brother toward the elevators, Jeanette dropped to her knees on the plush carpet, pleading with me to save her husband and son from prison. I looked down at her with complete emotional detachment, reminding her that when I was freezing on the streets 3 years ago, she never once showed a shred of maternal mercy or concern for my life. With the Carmel mansion undergoing immediate foreclosure and all family bank accounts frozen by federal authorities, Jeanette was left entirely penniless, facing total public disgrace and an absolute eviction notice within days. I turned my back on her desperate cries, leaving my legal team to escort her off the premises as I walked out onto my private executive balcony. Standing high above the Indianapolis skyline, looking out over the flourishing medical enterprise I had built with my own sweat, blood, and tears, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of liberation. My toxic family had attempted to tear down my hard-won success through cyber attacks, emotional manipulation, and federal fraud, but their greed ultimately sealed their own tragic destruction. I refused to grant them any unearned forgiveness or fake reconciliation, choosing instead to protect my boundaries, my dignity, and my future with unwavering resolve. I was no longer the defenseless girl shivering in a delivery van, but a completely free, resilient woman commanding her own destiny at the absolute peak of her career. The ultimate downfall of my family serves as an unshakable testament that arrogance, deceit, and systemic betrayal will eventually dismantle even the most privileged lives. When people choose to inflict harm and construct their entire existence on a foundation of lies, justice will inevitably catch up to them, tearing down their illusions and leaving them to face the harsh consequences of their actions alone. Building true strength requires standing firm against abusive dynamics, protecting your peace at all costs, and knowing when to permanently sever ties with those who seek to destroy you. Thank you so much to every single one of you in our audience who stayed and listened to this emotional journey until the very end. Your incredible support and time mean the absolute world to us as we share these powerful stories of survival justice and self-made triumph. What are your personal thoughts on how this intense conflict concluded, and do you believe Tanya made the right choice by standing her ground completely, Please take a moment to leave your thoughts, opinions, and personal perspectives in the comments section below, and remember to like and subscribe for more compelling stories.